Jasmine Crockett stood resolute in the Congressional hearing room, her deep purple blazer a vivid contrast against the polished wood panels. Her pulse quickened as C-SPAN cameras zoomed in, broadcasting every moment to millions. Moments earlier, Pam Bondi had unleashed a scathing verbal attack that reverberated through the chamber. "Congresswoman Crockett is unfit and incompetent for office," Bondi declared sharply, her words sparking chaos. Republicans nodded in approval, Democrats shouted objections, and the chairman struggled to restore order. Yet through the uproar, Crockett remained still, gripping her notes with quiet confidence, her eyes fixed ahead. Pam Bondi, the former Florida Attorney General, sat with a smirk, certain she had dismantled the freshman lawmaker from Texas. But Crockett, a seasoned civil rights attorney known for her sharp logic and unwavering focus, saw the moment differently. This wasn't an insult. It was an opportunity to expose Bondi's contradictions before the nation. With a steady breath, she reached for the microphone, a subtle smile forming as she prepared to speak. This wasn't just another hearing. It was the start of a showdown that would etch Jasmine Crockett's name into headlines across America. Before we dive into this gripping clash, make sure to hit subscribe and share where you're tuning in from in the comments. You won't want to miss this unforgettable political confrontation. The tension in the room was palpable, almost tangible through the screen as cameras panned across the chamber. Pam Bondi sat with impeccable posture, her blonde hair flawlessly styled, her designer blazer reinforcing her air of authority. As Florida's former top legal officer, Bondi had built a national reputation as a fierce conservative advocate, often defending traditional values and limited government on television. Invited as a special witness to the House Oversight Committee to discuss election integrity, she began smoothly. "Thank you, Mr. Chairman," she said, her courtroom-honed voice filling the space. "I'm here because Americans deserve the truth about our elections." But within minutes, her true intent surfaced. Instead of addressing the topic, Bondi launched personal attacks on Democratic members, reserving her sharpest barbs for Jasmine Crockett. "Congresswoman Crockett," she said with a condescending smile, "claims to champion voting rights while her district struggles. She's been in office barely a year, achieving nothing but headlines and division. Texans deserve better than an activist posing as a leader." Republicans nodded approvingly as Democrats erupted in protest, the chairman's gavel pounding for order as Bondi pressed her unprovoked tirade. Across the chamber, Crockett remained composed, her silence deliberate. The young Texas lawmaker had taken a different path to Congress. A civil rights attorney, she had defended protesters and fought voter suppression laws long before entering politics. Her voters chose her for her outsider status, not establishment ties. What Bondi didn't know was that Crockett had anticipated this attack. For 3 days, her team had meticulously compiled records of Bondi's tenure as Florida's Attorney General, uncovering ethics controversies, questionable decisions, and selective enforcement that painted a troubling picture. As Bondi continued her grandstanding, Crockett arranged her documents, waiting patiently. Her courtroom experience had taught her to let facts, not emotions, speak. This wasn't just a clash of two strong women. It was a test of integrity. Bondi, the polished insider with political connections, versus Crockett, the grassroots fighter for justice. The chairman's gavel struck. "Ms. Bondi, please focus on the hearing subject. Congresswoman Crockett, you have 5 minutes." Crockett nodded calmly, her eyes carrying the same focus she once brought to dismantling dishonest witnesses in court. She wasn't angry, she was ready. Bondi had made a critical error by underestimating her. "The gentlewoman from Texas is recognized," the chairman announced. The room hushed. Crockett thanked the chair with poised professionalism. "Ms. Bondi," she began evenly, "before we address today's issue, I'd like to correct some inaccuracies about my record and qualifications." Bondi leaned back, smirking, expecting Crockett to falter. But Crockett had other plans. "I find it curious," she said, her tone calm but piercing, "that someone who's never served in Congress feels qualified to judge how it operates." The room fell silent. Crockett lifted a folder. "Since you've raised the issue of experience, let's examine yours. As Florida's Attorney General, your duty was to serve the people, not special interests. Would you agree?" Bondi shifted slightly. "Of course I served Florida faithfully," she replied quickly. "That's interesting," Crockett continued, her voice steady, her gaze sharp. Because records show your office received a $25,000 donation from Donald Trump's foundation, days before opting out of the Trump University investigation. Can you explain that timing? The chamber erupted, Republicans shouted out of order. Democrats leaned forward, riveted. The chairman's gavel pounded. That issue was resolved years ago, Bondi responded, her confidence waning. There was no connection between the donation and my office's decision. This is a distraction from your lack of achievements. Crockett gave a faint nod, anticipating the deflection. I appreciate your perspective, she said evenly. Now let's address election integrity, your stated reason for being here. During your 8 years as Attorney General, how many voter fraud cases did your office prosecute? Bondi hesitated. I don't have that number in front of me. Would it surprise you, Crockett pressed, lifting a page, that it was fewer than 5? Yet your office repeatedly declined to investigate voter suppression allegations in minority communities. Can you explain those priorities? A shift rippled through the chamber as Bondi's confidence cracked. Crockett's relentless questioning backed by documents tilting the dynamic in her favor. Halfway through her time, Crockett pivoted smoothly. Now about today's hearing on election integrity, she said, raising a report. The Brennan Center for Justice has consistently debunked claims of widespread voter fraud, confirmed by courts, bipartisan officials, and researchers. Ms. Bondi, are you familiar with these findings? I disagree with the Brennan Center's conclusions, Bondi replied tersely, trying to regain footing. Unfazed, Crockett produced another document. Then perhaps you recall Christopher Krebs, Trump's cybersecurity chief, who confirmed the 2020 election was the most secure in U.S. history before being fired for saying so. Was he wrong? That was his opinion, Bondi said sharply, her voice rising. And what about Attorney General William Barr? Crockett pressed. Who said there was no evidence of fraud that could have changed the election's outcome? Was that just an opinion? The room stilled, cameras zooming in as Bondi glanced nervously at her team. What began as her attempt to humiliate Crockett was unraveling her own credibility. As Bondi tried to interrupt, Crockett raised a steady hand. Mr. Chairman, I have 1 minute left. The chairman nodded, silence returning. You didn't come here to discuss election integrity, Crockett said, her voice firm yet calm. You came to attack me, assuming a freshman congresswoman would be an easy target. That was a mistake. She stacked her papers, eyes locked on Bondi. When you question my competence, you're dismissing the 750,000 Texans who sent me here. The chairman's gavel tapped. Time, he announced. I yield back, Crockett said, her tone final. And I'd advise you, Ms. Bondi, to come prepared next time you challenge someone's record. The room fell silent, then erupted. Reporters shouting, members whispering in disbelief. Bondi, once confident, sat pale, whispering frantically with her aides. Everyone knew. This confrontation was just the beginning. The hearing continued, but the energy had shifted. Republicans avoided engaging Bondi directly, sticking to safe talking points, wary of another spiraling confrontation. Democrats, sensing blood in the water, pressed Bondi on inconsistencies Crockett had exposed. Crockett sat quietly, jotting notes, her calm focus unwavering. Observers noticed a sealed envelope among her papers unopened. 2 hours later, the chairman called the second round of questioning. Congresswoman Crockett, you're recognized for 3 minutes. The chamber hushed as she adjusted her microphone. Ms. Bondi, she began, respectful yet firm. Earlier, you questioned my effectiveness, suggesting I'm an activist posing as a congresswoman. Let's correct the record. Bondi nodded cautiously, more guarded now. In my first year, Crockett continued, I've co-sponsored 27 bills, 5 signed into law with bipartisan support, including healthcare access for veterans and small business funding for underserved areas. These aren't headlines, they're results. I've held 32 town halls because accountability isn't optional. It's essential. The contrast was stark. Bondi, a prosecutor but never a legislator, looked diminished. Now let's revisit election integrity, Crockett said. Do you believe spreading unverified voter fraud claims damages public trust in democracy? Bondi shifted. We should investigate credible allegations, she replied cautiously. That wasn't my question, Crockett said evenly. On November 10, 2020, you said on television, we have evidence of systemic fraud that will overturn results. Do you stand by that today? Tension skyrocketed, cameras zooming in as Bondi glanced at her team. "I was conveying what I believed true then," she said faintly. Crockett reached for the sealed envelope. "Then you may want to explain this," she said, opening it. "These are sworn affidavits from 3 of your former staffers, stating you privately admitted there was no credible evidence of widespread fraud, even as you publicly claimed otherwise." Gasps echoed through the chamber. Bondi's face paled. "They're willing to testify under oath," Crockett continued, unrelenting. "They describe meetings where you called fraud claims legally indefensible but politically necessary. Would you like to amend your statement?" Bondi's lawyers whispered urgently, panic evident. "My statements were based on preliminary information," she stammered. "Yes or no, Ms. Bondi," Crockett cut in, commanding. "Did you knowingly promote false election claims?" Silence hung heavy. Reporters frozen, cameras capturing Bondi's faltering expression. "I was advocating for investigations," she said weakly. Crockett paused, then delivered her final blow. "I have a transcript from your remarks at a Heritage Foundation dinner, February 18, 2021, where you said, 'The election fraud narrative is useful for fundraising, but these legal cases are going nowhere.' Would you explain that to this committee?" Chaos erupted. Gasps, shouts, and stunned silence. The chairman's gavel pounded, but the uproar persisted. Bondi's microphone caught her whisper. "How did she get that?" "It was private." Crockett spoke again, her tone softer but resolute. "Ms. Bondi, you questioned my integrity, but the real question is whether you misled Americans for political and financial gain. This hearing was meant to uncover truth about election integrity, and today the truth spoke. The difference between us isn't experience, it's what public service means. To me, it's honesty and accountability, not performance." She gathered her documents, meeting Bondi's gaze with disappointment, not triumph. "You questioned whether I belong in Congress. I believe Americans will soon question whether you should claim to speak for them." As Crockett yielded her time, the room erupted in quiet awe. Social media exploded with clips, Bondi exposed trending nationwide. Networks cut into broadcasts, CNN's headline reading, "Crockett confrontation, Rep exposes Bondi's contradictions." Even Fox News ran, "Explosive hearing, Bondi faces allegations." The confrontation was labeled a devastating congressional takedown. Bondi, once assertive, sat stunned, her credibility unraveling. Other members passed on questions, sensing the defining moment. When the chairman adjourned, Crockett walked out calmly, leaving a shaken Bondi behind. Reporters crowded the hallway, but Crockett paused briefly. "Today showed the difference between political theater and public service. I hope Americans reflect on what they want from their leaders," she continued to her office, refusing to turn the moment into self-promotion. Bondi remained seated, surrounded by her frantic team, C-SPAN cameras capturing her pale, distant expression. Reporters shouted about the transcript and affidavits, but she left silently, face tense. Within an hour, and Dirk Crockett destroys Bondi trended, a clip of Crockett's honesty and accountability line hitting 10 million views. The Heritage Foundation distanced itself, calling the dinner a casual event, but didn't dispute Bondi's quotes. Republican senators expressed concern, calling for transparency. GOP leadership scrambled to contain fallout, worried about election messaging and fundraising. 3 conservative organizations announced Bondi's resignation from their boards, and a talk show appearance was canceled. Her social media went dark after a vague claim that Crockett's statements were out of context, widely criticized for dodging the evidence. The staffer's attorney confirmed their readiness to testify, stating they acted at personal risk for truth. Crockett's profile soared. Democratic leaders, once viewing her as outspoken, now saw a force of precision. She declined most interview requests, saying, "I didn't come to Washington to be a celebrity. I came to protect democracy." Analysts called the confrontation a turning point, where truth trumped partisanship. "This wasn't just outmaneuvering," a CNN commentator said. "It was preparation over performance, substance over spectacle." Crockett raised the standard for political integrity. 3 days later, the Washington Post published an investigation confirming Crockett's revelations, with documents and sources verifying Bondi's private admissions about fraud claims. The findings shocked political circles, proving Crockett's questioning was truth backed by evidence. In Texas, Crockett's office was flooded with support. local headlines hailing her as a force for accountability. Her approval rating jumped 15 points in polls, reflecting her resonance with voters. Bondi's career unraveled. Legal analysts debated ethics violations, the Florida bar received complaints, and the House Ethics Committee launched a preliminary inquiry into possible misinformation. A broader conversation emerged about truth and responsibility in public service. Editorials across the spectrum agreed. Crockett had exposed the dangerous gap between private knowledge and public statements, serving democracy. An Atlantic historian wrote, "The Crockett-Bondi clash may mark when post-truth politics began to crack, through calm, evidence-based integrity." 2 weeks later, Crockett gave a podcast interview. Asked about the viral moment, she said, "I wasn't aiming for a clip or career boost. I was standing for truth, because that's what democracy requires. Some believe performance would win, but I believe Americans deserve better." Her words resonated, earning bipartisan approval. "My goal is to serve with integrity," she said, putting truth above theatrics. 3 months later, Bondi had vanished from public view, her reputation in tatters. Crockett turned her visibility into progress, passing bipartisan election security legislation boosting local systems and transparency. The irony was clear. Bondi's attempt to humiliate a freshman reshaped political discourse. The Crockett standard emerged, demanding alignment between private beliefs and public statements. Politicians faced a new question. Do your private words match your public positions? What began as an ambush became a historic shift, proving that in a healthy democracy, truth and accountability backed by evidence prevail. Thank you for joining this powerful story of courage and transformation. Like, subscribe, and share for more coverage of defining moments in politics. Share your thoughts. Did the Crockett-Bondi showdown change how leaders will be held accountable? Join us next for more stories where integrity meets impact.